All right, the basics of incorporation. How does it work around a C corporation? Obviously, these are going to be a little different for the various company types, but we'll talk about the C corporation. There are 4 key documents. The first is the Certificate of Incorporation. So let's talk about, we'll go through each of these documents, talk about what's in them and what they do, and you should have a better understanding of what incorporation involves. So the Certificate of Incorporation is the first document. It's probably the basic document. It's also referred to as the Articles of Incorporation. This document is filed with the state and is really what originally establishes your corporation. It includes things like the name, the address of the company. It establishes classes of shares if the corporation has various classes. This designates one person as the incorporator, the person that's actually executing the incorporation. It also establishes the initial powers of the board of directors, and it gives you the right to amend the certificate or the articles of incorporation over time. So, kind of sets up the basics and then says, you can change it in the future if you need to. The second document is the bylaws. The bylaws is a lot like what it sounds. It basically lays down some of the governing laws of how the company is going to work. This includes things like stockholders meetings. It might establish those and say how often they're to be held. It'll give you all kinds of meeting requirements around stockholders meetings or board of directors meetings. Remember, one of the things that separates the corporation from some of the other company types is that you are forced to have regular meetings and have record what happens in those meetings and have better tracking of what gets discussed. That's good for people like investors, but it takes a little more time and energy for the folks running the company. The bylaws also lays down the rules of the board of directors. This says some of the powers that the board of directors has. This says how often it has to meet, how many there are, what it takes to become a board member. If you drop out, what do you have to do, etc. And this also sets up the process for appointing officers. It says, these are the various officers and how they're going to be appointed. And then it also creates committees or subcommittees on the board of directors. Boards will sometimes have subsidiary committees like a compensation committee that decides things like executive compensation. So those committees are established by the bylaws. The third is the action by written consent, and you'll hear that referred to as the action by written consent of incorporator. This adopts the bylaws, so remember, these are the basics, this is where we are, this is the basic structure. The bylaws are like, okay, here's all the rules for how we're going to run the company, and this action by written consent says the bylaws are now adopted and they become law. It also names the board of directors. There are some variations on this, but these are the basics. It may actually say these 3 guys or these 5 guys are on the board of directors. That's a relatively short document. Then there's an initial board consent. This is a very important document. It holds a lot of information, a little more than I have here, but this will give you the general flavor of how it works. First, it ratifies the incorporation. It says that the board says, yes, the incorporation was valid. It also adds a minute book and establishes a minute book, so it gives you rules about how you take minutes. It appoints officers to positions like president, CEO, secretary. It names those officers. It issues common stock to shareholders, which is important. It adopts equity incentive plan, often, if the company chooses to do so. It will adopt an equity incentive plan. And it also lays out a bunch of the financial rules for the company. So it says, hey, you can have a bank account, you can start reimbursing expenses, we're going to set the accounting year for the company to either a fiscal or a calendar accounting year. They may say, if it's a calendar fiscal accounting, the year starts in January and ends in December. And it also establishes a federal tax ID, which is important because that becomes that tax ID becomes a number that companies use often to identify themselves and to do various things. So pretty simple, what and where, kind of the basics, the nitty-gritty rules about how things work and what you have to do to get onto the board of directors or to appoint officers or how often meetings are going to happen and under what circumstances. This is just saying, yes, we agree to these things, and then the initial board consent starts laying down some of the